Hi, I'm David Hughes. Today on this instructional DVD, we're going to cover the assembly of your fast joint jig, setting up the router, and 11 different style joints that can be made with the templates that come with your fast joint system. Let's get started putting our jig together. Before you get started assembling your fast joint system, there are a few things that you have to do to get prepped and ready. The first thing you want to do is lay out all your parts and components on top of your workbench and take an inventory. On page 3 of your owner's manual, every part is listed and numbered to allow you to refer back to it through the manual once you start assembly. There are a few things that you're also going to need, or tools you'll need, for the assembly process. You're going to need a square, a Phillips head screwdriver, a pair of C-clamps or F-clamps, a pair of pliers, and a 3/32 drill bit. Let's get started doing our assembly. First thing you want to do is grab your base plate. There really isn't a top or a bottom side of the base plate, so it doesn't really matter what side you apply the abrasive to. The first thing is to grab the self-adherent abrasive strip that has the cutouts on it, peel the backing, and line that up to the threaded opening so that the sandpaper does not interfere with any of these holes. Now I like to peel off the first portion of the self-adhering back and get my piece started to make sure that we absolutely don't interfere with any of those holes. Once I get it started, just simply peel the back of it off and apply that down to your base plate. Once you have your abrasive on there, you need to assemble your toggle clamps. Take the rubber bumper and apply the small nut onto that rubber bumper about 3/4 of the way down the bumper. Slide that into the underside of the toggle clamp and take the wing nut and just snug it up. We'll adjust this later on when we start making some projects. You're going to repeat that same process on all 3 toggles. Once you have your toggles assembled, you're ready to assemble the guide blocks. Now this is a little tricky because we need to line up the 4 holes with the 4 holes on the guide block. Take your toggle, adjust that so the handle is in the upright position. This gives you clearance to allow the Phillips head screwdriver to get beyond there to snug up those screws. We're going to place that down on top. We're going to take the long threaded screws and start those on the back side. Now it's a little tricky to get these started at first, but if you line up those holes, it goes pretty quickly. Now you do not want to tighten these all the way. All you want to do is just snug them up to allow us to make the adjustment to this block. Now here's the tricky part. Once you get the back 2 screws in place, you have to readjust the head of the toggle clamp. If I try to get my screwdriver in there now, the handle of that will get in the way. So just lift the toggle clamp back and place the other 2 screws in the front side of the toggle. Now as you can see, I haven't tightened this up. The reason why we don't tighten it is because it allows me to adjust the block back and forth for my alignment. Before we do that though, we have to assemble the other side. Place the block on top again. I like to align those holes. Take your toggle, again, make sure the rubber bumper is facing the inside of the jig. Make sure the handle is in the upright position, and go ahead and assemble the other side. Now that we have both of our alignment blocks assembled onto the base plate, we need to install the 4 template guide locking knobs. Now again, we do not want to tighten these up. We're just putting them onto the jig loose. The reason why we have to leave all these components loose is because we have to square up our jig and make sure that both sides of the jig are absolutely parallel. One of the biggest issues that we have, or people give us a call about and say, well, my joints aren't assembling or going together the right way. Well, the number one cause of that is the two sides aren't set up parallel. And what we're going to show you here, and we show you in the manual, is a very simple way of making sure that both of these sides are absolutely parallel to one another. Now that we have our 4 screws in place, we're going to square up one end of the jig. Take your square, place the inside edge up against the base plate, slide that down until we touch the base block. Now this is why we left these 4 screws loose, because as you can see, I can actually adjust that base block back and forth until we are perfectly square. Now what I do is I just let the square do the work for me. All I do is I slide those 2 up, and as you can see, it's automatically squared up the base plate for me. Now, holding that in place, we're going to go ahead and just snug up these front 2 screws, making sure that the block does not move. Again, we need to move the toggle to its lower position here so we can access the back screws. Now we snugged up those back 2 nice and tight. Let's go back and tighten up those front 2. And we're all set. Now part of the design of this jig is that abrasive skid strip that actually goes underneath those blocks. Because we put the abrasive down underneath the block, that prevents that block from adjusting or sliding around once we do our initial setup. Now that we've got one side set up in square, we need to set up the other side perfectly parallel to this side. We're going to use a set of our templates to do that. Inside your package you get 4 different templates. What we're going to do is we're going to use the most popular template, which is our heart template. Each template is marked with a female or a male side. Now it really doesn't matter which side you place these templates on. To assemble them, you'll see that the template has a little notch on the bottom side. We're going to stand our jig up. We're going to slide that down onto those bolts with that notch side facing down. And what we're going to do here is we're going to secure the side that we've squared up. Now here's the important part. We're going to take this and push this down so the template sits flat against the base plate and secure that one side. Make sure you do not secure this side. All we want to do is just bring that in, but we're going to leave it loose. Once you have one side installed, turn the jig around and put the other template on the opposite side. Again, we do not want to tighten both sides of our template. The only thing that we want to tighten right now is the side that we've squared up. So push it down onto the base plate and tighten up that one side. Now the reason why we're not tightening up this other side is because this block can still be adjusted back and forth and it can still move around on us. We have to set it parallel to the side that we've already squared. Now trying to take a tape measure and measure across this area and get it perfectly straight is pretty hard to do. So what we've done when we designed this jig is we took out that guesswork or that measurement. The MDF base block that's designed to mount to the right angle fence is actually CNC milled on both sides. These 2 sides are absolutely parallel. So we're going to use this to set up the jig. All you do is place this down on top of the jig, adjust that block back till it sits down in place, like so. What we want to do is adjust our toggle over here so it pinches it down and applies the pressure for us. Now, take that base plate, push that flat up against that edge, and secure it in place. Now, once you have that side locked in place, that parallel line is exactly parallel over here. We're going to adjust this base plate block up against the edge, and we're going to secure that down with a toggle. Once we have that down and secure, all you need to do is tighten up the 4 screws that hold that toggle in place. Once you have that secure, you're ready to tighten up those other 2 knobs and test the jig to make sure that you've got both blocks parallel. We test it by releasing the second toggle, and that block should travel perfectly parallel on the jig without any binding. As you can see, we've got that set up perfect. Now that our base is assembled and our MDF block is sliding smoothly, we want to remove that and set it out of the way. We need to assemble our third toggle onto the mounting block. Now, again, we've got the exact same problem that we have over here on the side, is that the bolt or the screws are going to interfere with that handle position. So we're going to start on the back 2 holes first, line them up with the holes on the setup block, flip it upside down, slide that 1 machine screw through the hole, flip it over, keep your finger on the underside, and make sure you place the lock washer on top before you put the nut onto that machine screw. You can see they're really tiny and they're a little difficult to get started. We're just going to snug that one up. Repeat the exact same process on the other 3 holes. Slide that into place. Lock washer and the nut. Now that we've got the back 2 in place, we're going to have to raise up that toggle partial. Now you can see it does interfere with the back side of the screw here, so we want to make sure we still have enough clearance on the front screws. Slide that guy into place. Place the lock washer again on top, and the locking nut. Now the reason why these screws are so long is so that if you are doing very thick stock, you can put some shims underneath that toggle clamp and raise it up. Now we've got it started. Now if you find it hard getting in there with your hands, what I like to do is just flip it back over on the underside and rotate that screw, and that's going to basically tighten that nut up for us. Let's put that last one in place. Now once we've got them snugged up, we're going to line that up, grab your pliers, hold on to the head, rotate it over, and tighten up those screws. Repeat that same process on all 4. Now that we've got all 4 lined up, we're ready to set it down on top of our fast joint. The 2 locking knobs that come with it, slide the washer on the top side, and basically thread those onto the base plate. Now this toggle clamp is fully adjustable. As we get down to smaller stock, we're able to bring it in to do small pieces, or rotate it around the opposite direction to really get down if you wanted to do a piece that's only about 3/4 inches in width. Now that we've got our third toggle assembled, we're ready to assemble our right angle fixture. We're going to set our jig off to the side for right now. Now the right angle fixture is designed to hold the female side of the piece in the upright position. It also has a non-skid strip piece of abrasive as well. Now, here's the important part. You must place the abrasive onto the face of the right angle fixture first and align that front edge. If you don't do that first, when you go to align it, the board's not going to sit flat. So all you need to do is peel off the back. Now, I like to sit this on the edge of my workbench. This way I've got a nice flat surface to work with. And I like to keep this to the upper side and apply it down. Now we have to mount this to the MDF, and what we're looking for is to get a nice flat surface from the MDF to the abrasive. The reason why we apply the abrasive first, like I said, is see that little offset right here? That offset could cause the board to rock as we do our cutting. Now the easiest way to make sure that this surface is aligned with this surface is take the abrasive side and place that down on your workbench. Take the MDF and stand that up on its edge. Line up these two edges, and here's where those C clamps or F clamps come into play. What we want to do is clamp these two surfaces together, making sure they're both sitting on that nice flat surface. I like to apply a little pressure down, and we're all set. As you can see on the front side, see the MDF is slightly raised above that. That way the MDF and the abrasive align. Take your drill and drill a pilot hole for the screws to start. Now again, I like to set that on the edge of my workbench. I'm going to take the 3 panhead screws and line them up to the pilot hole. Once you got them secure, remove the C clamps or F clamps. Now I always like to double check myself just to make sure we've got it right. We do that by placing a straight edge across that surface, and as you can see, both the MDF and the abrasive line up perfectly flat all the way across that surface. Now that we've got our right angle fixture set up and our jigs set up and both sides parallel, we're ready to move on to set up the router. Now that your fast join jig is assembled and ready for use, you need to set up your router. It is extremely important that your bushing guide is centered to the router bit. If it's not centered, you may damage the bushing guide, router bit, or your joints may fit sloppily. Before we get started though, make sure that your router is unplugged. Now included with your fast joint system, you're going to receive 3 different bushings. You're going to receive the standard bushing, what we refer to as a tight bushing, the 7/16 inch bushing, the locking nut, the spring lock washer. You also receive your centering pin, the 14-degree dovetail bit, as well as the 3/16 inch upcut spiral. Now this locking spring is rather unique to the fast joint system. If you've ever used a bushing guide set for a long period of time, you may have found out the hard way that this nut has a tendency to vibrate loose. What we've done is we've incorporated a spring steel washer that goes between the bushing and the locking nut to prevent that from vibrating loose. Now, we're going to use the standard bushing on our setup because our first joint that we're going to be working with is our heart template, which uses the 3/16 inch spiral bit. The 7/16 inch bushing is only ever used when you do half-blind dovetails or through dovetails and works in conjunction with the dovetail bit. We'll talk about this later on in the video. we're going to set it to the side for right now. Take your standard bushing and we're going to insert that into the plate of our router. Take your spring lock washer, place that on the underside, and secure in place with that locking ring. Now, almost every router out there will accept these brass bushings. It uses a 1 3/8 inch size to be adapted to that standard bushing guide set. Once you have your bushing guide in place, we're going to snap our ring back into our router plate and we're ready to align it. Take your centering pin with the collet loose, insert the centering pin through the standard bushing into that router bit. Now before you push that down, you're going to want to loosen up the 4 screws that hold your router to the router base plate. The reason why we do this is it allows that to self-center itself back up to that centering pin. Now once we have those 4 loose, we're going to push down on that pin, we're going to tighten up the collet on the underside, nice and secure, and hold that center and tighten back up the 4 screws that hold our router plate into place. Now this method of aligning that bit center will only work if the centering pin is slightly off to the collet. If there's a large distance, 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, you will have to remove the screws, adjust the entire router, and re-drill your plate to center it back up. Once you have it centered, loosen up that locking nut on the collet, remove the centering pin, and install your 3/16 inch router bit. Now, the tight bushing that comes with the system is used after we make a joint if it is a little sloppy, or that over a long period of time your router bit has worn a little bit. You may need to install that tight bushing to tighten up the joint. Now, for those of you who bought the fast joint system and realized after getting it home you do not have that standard size opening there, which is the 1 3/8, there are 2 ways to handle this. The first way is to give us a call. We do sell this as an accessory. It's made from 3/8 inch thick granular PVC, the same material that your templates are made out of. We've CNC milled the 1 3/8 inch opening in there to allow you to insert the bushing into the template, lock it in place with that same locking nut, set that down on top of your router table, again insert that centering pin, line this guy up center, and C-clamp or F-clamp it into place. Now if you don't want to purchase it as an accessory, you can make your own out of a piece of 3/8 inch MDF or any type of scrap material you have laying around using a Forstner bit to drill that outside hole. Just make sure that your bushing is nice and flush because it's important for that to be even so that you don't get hung up on it when you're cutting your templates. Now that we have our bushing centered, we're ready to start making some joints. Now that you have your fast joint jig assembled and the router bit centered to the bushing, we're ready to start making some projects. We're going to start out by making a 4-sided box. We've installed our heart templates onto our jig, which is our most popular set of templates that we sell. We've prepared our stock for the front and the sides of the drawers. This is going to be a 10 by 10 drawer box. Now the front and the back of the drawer must be a minimum of 3/4 inch thick stock. The size of the drawers can be any thickness from 1/4 inch all the way up to 3/4 or larger, depending upon what your needs are on your project. Today we're going to be making our size of our box out of 3/8 inch stock. Now instead of using the same species on both sides of our box, I like to use a contrasting species of wood. In this case, we're going to be using some walnut today. I've machined my walnut down to 3/8 inch in thickness. And the reason why I like using the walnut is because it's such a dark contrast to the poplar and will really let the joint stand out very clearly when we're through with our project. Now to get started, we're always going to start on the male side of the joint. The reason why it's important to start on the male side of the joint is because that's what determines the height of the router bit. It is always set up for the male side of the cut. I've installed my third toggle onto the jig to allow me to clamp the smaller species of stock. Our sides of our project are going to go into that jig, set it down in place. Before we start doing our alignment on the outside edge, we want to adjust our toggle front and back, and we also want to adjust the height. Now what I like to do is I like to use the third toggle as an additional holding device. I push that flat up against my stock, lock this down into place, and lock my toggles down. Now what you'll find out is you may have to adjust that wing nut a little bit for the thickness of stock that you're going to be working on. We're all set for that height. Bring this over, and what we want to do is we want to make sure that that router bit is just slightly above that surface. Now before we go making any sort of adjustments, make sure that your router is unplugged. I like to use our setup block. I place that on top, and that should come out just until it barely touches that top cutting surface. If you're too high or too low, just raise the router bit. Now that we have our router bit height set, we're ready to start making our first joint. Now before we do this, the very first time that you use the jig, that router bit is going to want to router into the edge of those guide blocks. And when that router bit grabs that plastic, it has a tendency to pull it, which could be a hazard and could cause you to snap a bit. So what you want to make sure you do before you actually start on your project, once you have your bit set, come over here and just clean out that little bit of plastic out of the way to allow you a good, clean, safe cut. Now, doing this, I'm going to remove my stock back out of the jig and go ahead and get this cleaned out. The very first time you use the jig, you want to make sure you clear out that excess stock on that block. To do that, we start on the outside edge, we pivot into that block, and we bring that down slowly and remove that plastic. Do not try to remove this all in one pass because it may grab the bit and damage the jig or snap that router bit. Now that we've cleaned out that excess plastic on the male side of the jig, we're ready to go ahead and cut our joints. Before we get started cutting those joints, we need to mark one side of that joint as a reference. Now I've taken all four pieces of my box and I'm going to place an X on one side of each of the pieces of stock. The reason why we need to mark the side of our stock is that side always should stay up against that side alignment block. Now, the easiest part about this jig is setting it up. The reason why? We've given you a setup block. Take the side with the X, place that up against the side of the setup block on that jig, place the setup block in front of that template, and slide the stock up until it touches the edge and secure it down in place with the two toggle clamps. Set your setup block to the side and we're ready to start making our cuts. That's how easy it is to set up the fast joint system. Now, I'm going to go over a few things with you about the cutting procedures while I make this cut and the reason why. Remember, your router bit is spinning counterclockwise. We're feeding into that cutter so it doesn't grab. As we feed into it, it's going to be pushing sideways on that grain and it will want to have a tendency to tear out or cut or blow out those outside edges. So what we're going to do in our cut process is we're going to come in, find the outline of the two hearts, and then work from the center of the hearts to the inside edge, from the center of the heart to the inside edge, and connect the two together to eliminate the tear out of our cutting of our assembly. Let's get started cutting. With your hands positioned on the back side of the jig, we start by pivoting into the outer edge of the block and slowly moving across our project until we find the first shape. Once we find the first shape, we're going to outline that and follow across until we find the second shape. Once we hit the second shape, we'll outline that as well and off the end of the project. Now to eliminate tear out, we're going to come in and back cut this lower piece just slightly to eliminate the tear out. Once we've eliminated that tear out area, go back to the center of the joint and rotate that into the cut. Find the center of the joint and bring that back into the cut. Go back over to the center of the joint, hit that into the cut, and connect the two edges together. Come back to the outside edge, work it into the cut, back out to the edge, and connect the two together. Now once we made our first pass, tap the jig, roll it out, and make your second final cleanup pass. Now I always like to go backwards one time just to make sure that I've cleaned everything up. Once you make it across that template and you hear no more cutting, it means that your joint is complete. Now, once you've completed one side of the joint, what you're going to do is with the same X side against the same setup block, flip the joint over and you're ready to cut the other side. We're going to set that back into our jig. We're going to grab our same setup block, slide that back until we touch the template, lock it down into place, and repeat the exact same process. Once we complete this side, we're going to put in the other side of the box and do the exact same thing on both sides. Now that we've finished routering both sides of our project, you can see it only taken me about a minute and a half to router all four pieces or all four edges so they're exactly the same. Now you may develop a little bit of fuzz on the underside here because this is an upcut spiral. Because the router is actually mounted upside down, the upcut spiral is pulling down to the table, and sometimes you get a little bit of fuzz there. I just like to take that little bit of fuzz and knock it off on that non-skid piece of sandpaper. Now that we're completed with the sides of our box, we're ready to start on the front and the back. We need to remove the third toggle clamp off the jig and install the right angle fixture. Now that we removed our third toggle clamp, we're ready to cut the female side of our box. All you do is take the jig and rotate it around to the opposite side. That is one of the nicest things about our system is that the male side is matched to the female side. So there's no setup, there's no more lining. Every time you put in a different template, they're automatically matched to both sides. Now the female side of the joint is cut in the upright position. That's where the right angle fixture comes into play. Take your right angle fixture, position that onto your jig, and now you're going to have to readjust your toggle clamps to get a good tight tension on them. Loosen up the wing nuts until you get the right tension. Now the key to setting up toggle clamps is not to over tighten them. If you do over tighten these toggle clamps, it may have a tendency to want to bow the jig or lift the stock up off the jig, and then you don't have consistency across your cut. Okay, we've got them adjusted for the height. We're going to make sure they're loose right now. We're going to use the exact same setup block that we used on the male side to set up the female side. Now here's where that X comes into play again. We want to take that same X and position it up against the outside edge of that block, stand it up on end. We want to position that stop block in front of it and slide the right angle fence up until we're flush across that front surface and secure that down into place. Once we have that done and secure, take the 2 spring clamps that came inside your package and spring clamp that piece onto the right angle fence, and we're ready to start doing our routering again. Now, if your project is a very large project, you don't want to use those spring clamps. You want to use something that has a little bit stronger holding power. The C clamp or the F clamp works the best for larger projects. We're going to follow the exact same procedure that we followed on the male cut. The female cut is started the same way. Start on the outside edge of the block. We slide that over until we contact, until we find the first opening. And we're going to work the board back and forth inside that opening to hollow out the majority of the stock. Now, it's not important that we clean out all the stock here. We're just trying to get the bulk of it out. Now, we're going to stop the router here because I want to show you something that happens when cutting the female cut. You'll notice down here that you see all these long stringy shavings. Those long stringy shavings have a tendency to load up inside that opening and won't give us a good clean final cut. Now, on the female side of the cut, and only on the female side of the cut, you can remove your stock off the jig to get this little hairball or this little fuzz ball out of there so that the bushing guide rides nice and clean up against that template. The other thing that you'll notice is down here on the templates, you'll see that they have a tendency to load up on those inside edges as well. Those inside edges as well will have a tendency to keep it away from the bushing, and you won't get a good clean cut. The best way to clean these guys out is to tap the jig on top of the table, and as you can see, it cleans them out, or lift it up to the side and blow them off. Make sure that you keep those shavings out from around the edge of the bushing. Now, the reason why we can remove the stock off of the jig is because the side alignment and the right angle fixture never move. Just make sure you place that same X side back up against that same edge of the template, put the spring clamps back on in place, and finish cleaning out the rest of those joints. Again, we start on the left side and we work that across until we no longer hear the router bit cutting the stock. Now, if you feel as though you've got everything out of there and the joint is nice and clean, what I always like to do is lift the stock off, blow it out, and make my final pass. And we're done with one side of the joint. Now that we've finished one side of the joint, we're ready to cut the matching side. This is the biggest mistake that most people make when using our jig. That X must stay against that side. If you take the board and just flip it on the exact same side, you're going to have a drawer where one side goes this way and the other side goes this way. This is the secret to having the box come out uniform. What we're going to do is take it from this side and we need to rotate it over to the other side. In other words, that X is going to be up against this side of the box. Now, because we've set this up parallel, there's no need to get out our setup block and reset this side. It's already been set for us. All you need to do is make sure you're tied up against that edge, apply your spring clamps, and make your second cut. We're going to do the exact same procedure starting from the outside edge, moving in, cleaning out the center of the hole. Let's get started. Now the great thing about the fast joint system is it allows your fingers just to follow the template. Unlike a scroll saw or bandsaw where you try to trace a line, it's as simple as letting the template do the work. Again, we're not trying to remove all the material on the first pass. What we need to do is set it, clean up the stock, pull out those fibers and come back and make our second pass. Now that we've got that complete, we want to repeat the same process on the back side of the drawer. That finishes up the back side. And again, you may want to take some sandpaper and clean off that little fuzz on the back side. We're ready for assembly. I'm going to grab my other piece of stock. I'm also going to grab a dead blow mallet to tap these together. Now normally what we do is we'd add a little bit of glue inside the joint before we assemble it, but I like to assemble it dry first to make sure everything is fitting up real nice. Now here's where that X that we marked earlier comes into play. You want to make sure that you rotate all of your pieces so that the X's are all facing the same side. Now what I like to do is I like to place my stock down on a flat surface, take my side pieces and set that on top with the X facing the exact same direction to get it started. Give it a little tap. Take the second side. Place that down on top. Give it a little tap. Take the top piece. Place that in. And get it started. Now, if we just take the mallet and hammer on it right now, there's a good chance that pushing these joints together could cause the little fibers of wood to splinter out. That's the reason why I like to put it down on a flat surface, because it makes sure that it supports the stock nice and tight. And there's our box. Notice how all the edges are nice and flush. And look at the contrast between the walnut and the poplar. It really makes that joint stand out. Now, that box was assembled basically taking the male side and laying it down flat and the female side standing upright. Now if you want, you can change the look of that project just by doing one simple thing. Instead of cutting the female side in the upright position, lay that down flat and cut that in the flat position and cut the male side up in the upright position. Let me show you what the end results are going to look like here. As you can see here, this is the exact same cut that we just made on the box. This is putting the stock down flat on the male side template, and the stock is standing upright up against the right angle fence on the female side. Now, you can create a completely different look just by reversing that process. Here, we've taken the female side and laid the stock down flat on that template, and we've taken the stock and stood it upright on the male side template. and it gives you a complete reverse look of the first cut that we made. Now I'm going to put these two side by side, and you can see the differences here. Look how nice the contrast is with that walnut up against that oak. It will really make for a sharp project. Now that we've test fitted our box and everything looks nice and flush and nice and clean, we're going to pop it back apart. I'm going to rabbit a groove on the bottom side here so we can put a panel in the bottom, glue it back up, stain it, and finish it, and we've got ourselves a sharp looking drawer box. Our next type of joint that we're going to make with our fast joint system is a recess joint. Now this joint is made exactly the same way we made that first box joint, with one difference. When we go to cut the female side of the joint, we will raise the bit an extra 1/4 of an inch to create that offset look. Again, I'm using two contrasting woods here so that the joint really stands out in my finished project. The front is made out of a 3/4 inch poplar, and our sides are made out of 3/8 inch. Again, your front and back of the box must be made out of a minimum of 3/4 inch stock, and our sides we have a variable in there, 1/4, half, 3/4, or whatever you decide to do. We're going to start out by working, again, the male side of the piece first. Just like we did on our first project, place your stock into the jig. I've put my third toggle clamp back on. I take my setup block, I slide the stock forward again until it touches, and secure it into place. Now, just like that first project, we're going to start on the outside edge. We're going to walk it through, find the shapes, and draw it to the inside edge. I've also marked the same outside edge on my stock to keep a reference point up against that outside block. Let's go ahead and do some routering. Again, I always like to come and back cut this so it eliminates the chipping on the back side. Now, if you don't feel comfortable creating this little back cut, you can always put a piece of masking tape on the edge to prevent the tear out. Start from the center of the joint and work to the outside edge. Center of the joint to the inside of the template, from the outside edge to the inside of the template, and connect the two together. Again, we want to make sure we tap the jig and keep it nice and clean. Now that we've finished one side of the joint, we're going to take the stock back out, flip it back over, keeping the same reference up against the same back edge, use the exact same setup block that we used, set it against the template, slide it forward, and secure it in place with those two toggles, and start routing the other side. We're going to complete this process on both sides of our box. As you can see, we've finished up both sides of the box. This is just like the first box that we showed you. Again, you might have a little fuzz. I just like to take it on that non-skid sandpaper and knock it off. It's a real easy, quick, fast way to get that off the back side. Now that we're through with the sides of our box, we're going to set them off to the side here. We're going to grab our front and back side of our stock. As you can see, we've already marked the edge with a reference mark. We need to remove that third toggle clamp again. Set that to the side. We're going to grab our right angle fence. Again, just take the template, rotate it around, and we're going to use the female side of our joint. Now, before we do that, we're going to raise our router bit to create this recess. Now, you can create a 1/4 inch recess, a 3/8 inch recess. It's entirely up to you as far as what type of look you're going for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the router a 1/4 inch above our size of the box. Now, if you are working in hard stock and you want to do a 3/4 or larger, you're going to have to make this one pass on all 4 pieces or on all 4 ends, raise the bit a second time and make a second pass so that you don't snap that bit. Remember, this is only a 3/16 inch spiral bit, and if you're trying to take off too much in one pass, it could stress the bit and cause it to snap. Now that we've got our bit raised, move our toggles out of the way, place our right angle fence into the jig, and again, we need to adjust the toggles for the thickness stock. In this case, it's the 3/4 inch MDF that we're working with here, until it just snaps down in place. We grab that same setup block, place that in front, take the side with the X, slide our fence front or back, position the X up against the side of the block, and slide that forward until we hit that setup block. No measuring, no rulers, everything's done with that simple setup block. Now that we've got that set up, we're going to grab our spring clamps, and we're ready to start doing our routering. We're going to do the exact same procedure like we did on that first box. Start from the outside edge, find the opening, and we're going to rough clean it out, remove it, blow out the fibers and sawdust to make sure the template is nice and clean, place the stock back on, and finish making that cut. Again, remember, we're not trying to make this all in one pass. The beauty about our system is you can take this off, clean out the fibers. You notice how you get that build up again. Get the piece that you're milling back into the jig and re-secure it and finish cleaning it out. Now that we've got that all cleaned out, all you need to do again is rotate that over to the opposite side of the jig, slide it up against the side of that block, clamp it back into place with those spring clamps, and repeat that exact same process on the second side. Okay, that completes the other side of the box. Okay, just take a little bit of sandpaper and knock off that fuzz. We're ready for our assembly. Let me go ahead and grab our other pieces. Now, just like that first box, we want to take all those X's and line them to the upright position. That shows us which way the box goes together. Lay them down on a flat surface. Place your first piece on top. And go ahead and get it started. Again, always make sure you support that piece so that it doesn't end up busting out on you. Now right now, because we've set it on a flat surface, it's nice and flush, but this is a recess joint. To get it to recess, put a spacer block of wood underneath the box, bring it out to the outside edge, and go ahead and tap down on that. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to push that joint deep down in and create that 3D or that recessed look. As you can see, we've got a nice recess here from the front of the box to the side of the box. Now you can let that flat and flush like you see right there, or have those hard edges, but what I like to do is I like to take a little sandpaper and come in and sand off those sharp corners so it gives it this really fluffy or pillowy look. This is great for kids' toy boxes or small hope chests for kids, so it's a nice soft surface to work with. I use a flap sander and a little bit of hand sander to get that nice round look. All we need to do is put a bottom and a top on here and our project's complete. The next type of joint we're going to be making is called our 3D joint. The male side of the joint actually protrudes out the female side of the joint. Now what makes this joint different than the other ones that we've shown you is that all 4 pieces of stock are exactly the same thickness. The sides of our box are going to be made out of the 3/8 inch walnut, and the front and the back is going to be made out of the 3/8 inch walnut. Before you get started, just like on all the other projects, you need to place an X on all 4 sides. We're going to start out cutting the male side of our joint, laying down in our fast joint system. We set up the height of the bit for the thickness of the stock that we're cutting. Again, make sure your router's unplugged before you check this process. Bring that over on top of the jig and raise the bit so it just barely sticks up above that surface. To set up the distance, grab your handy setup block, set that in front of the template, slide your stock forward till it touches, secure it in place with those 2 toggles, and we're ready to start making our cuts. Again, we start on the outside edge, working from the outside edge into the shape of the template. Now remember, whether you're using the heart template, the bread box, the top hat, the keys, large or small, the same cutting procedure follows for all the templates. Now that we've cut the first joint, release the toggles, take the stock out, flip it over, keeping the same X reference up against the side reference block, place it back into our jig, take our setup block, slide it forward, lock it in place, and repeat the cutting process. Once you finish up with this one side, repeat the exact same process on the other side of the drawer. Now that we've got both sides cut nice and clean, we're ready to cut the female side of the joint. Rotate the jig around to the female side of the template and remove that 3rd toggle clamp. Grab our right angle fixture, place that down onto the jig, and grab our stock. You can see our X's have already been marked to the side that will go up against the outside edge. We need to readjust the toggle clamps for the thickness of the MDF. Now, when you do cut this joint, the router bit is going to cut into the MDF subplate. That's not an issue or problem. standard 3/4 inch MDF that can be replaced as you wear that out. Not only are we going to cut into that when we actually cut with our three-dimensional joint, but we're also going to cut into that when we do our through dovetail and our half-blind dovetail. We use the exact same procedure that we used before for setting up. Take your stock with the X placed up against the side, slide that forward until that stock hits your setup block, and go ahead and lock your MDF plate into place. Take your spring clamps and secure the stock in place. And we're ready to make our cut. Now we can remove our stock, pull it off, take a look to make sure we got everything, which we have. If we missed a piece, place it back on, put your spring clamp back on, and finish making the cut. Now just like in all the other boxes, whenever you're doing a four-sided box, you cannot just flip this over and cut the opposite side, because the box will come out the wrong direction for the sides. You must rotate the stock over to the opposite side of the jig. Just like on that first cut, we do not have to reposition the jig because it's already set up for us because our block travels parallel back and forth. We go through the exact same procedures to make this cut. We've now completed milling all four edges of our front and back of our 3D box. We're ready for some assembly. Just like in the other boxes, you want to line up all four X's so they face the same direction so that you have a nice flush joint when you assemble your box. Place the male side down on the flat surface. Take your female side and get it started. Give it a little tap to get it started. Flip it around so you support the material before you have it at home. And there's our 3D box. Notice how the top of the heart protrudes out the front and the back side. This is great for making jewelry boxes, carrying trays, serving trays, sort of knick-knack boxes. It's got a really unique look to it and gives it that three-dimensional look. Apply a little bit of finish and stain on there, and you've got yourself a finished project. Now if you take a look at your jig, you'll notice that there's a little cutout here on the side. Don't worry about that. It's standard 3/4 inch MDF and can be replaced at any time. You can also revert the fence over to the opposite side and you got a whole fresh new edge on the other side. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next joint. This next joint we're going to show you is a very unique way of joining boards to create a little bit of flair in your projects. We call this one an end-to-end joint. It's made by cutting the male side and the female side both laying down flat on the jig. Just like all of your other projects, you start on the male side, set your router bit up for the thickness stock that you're going to be working with. In this case, I'm working with all 3/8 inch stock. I'm going to join my walnut in the center by 2 pieces of poplar on either end. We do want to make sure we mark the edges on all 3 pieces and keep them up against the edge of our setup block. Just like before, we're going to use the exact same setup block. Place our stock down for the male side with the X up against the block. Slide our setup block up against the front of the template and slide it forward until it touches secure it in place with the 2 toggle clamps, and we're ready to start making our cuts. We use the exact same cutting procedure, working from the outside edge to the center, working around the joints, and doing a little pre-cutting back here to eliminate the chipping. Once we've completed one side, flip the board over, keeping the same side up against that setup block. Set up using your exact same setup block up against the template, slide forward till they touch, secure in place of the toggles, and cut the other side. Now that we've got both sides of our male cut completed, we need to do the female side of the joint. Take your jig, rotate it around to the female side. Take your pieces of stock that you plan on cutting the female joint to with that same X up against the outside edge. Place that down into your jig. Take the same setup block and slide that forward till we touch, secure in place with the 2 toggle clamps. And we're ready to make our cuts. You're going to cut the exact same procedure like you would when you cut the nail. Remember, work from the outside in. Just like on all the other joints, you want to make sure you clean out the dust, blow it out, make sure there's nothing up against the bushing, and come back in for that final cleanup pass. And there's your matching female side. Again, you'll see you get a little bit of fuzz on that underside. Just take a small piece of sandpaper and knock off that fuzz nice and clean. We're ready to cut the other side of the board. Follow the exact same procedures that we just showed you. Place your board into the jig, take the setup block, slide that forward till we touch, lock it into place, and make your cuts. Always work from the outside in, working from the left to the right side. Now we've completed our other piece of stock. Again, you'll notice here, especially when doing the female side cut laying down flat, you'll get a little bit of extra fuzz. I just take that on a little piece of sandpaper and knock that off of there. We're ready for our assembly. We've got our male side cut on both of these. We lay them on a flat surface. Again, you want to make sure you keep this nice and flat. Now, I like to make sure we keep a nice piece of support on top of this so nothing has a tendency to break out. Tap those 2 joints together. And there's our end-to-end joinery. It's an excellent way to create a little bit of flair to your next project. Now you can make this exact same cut in reverse by changing which side you decide to cut first and how you join your stock. Makes it very interesting for all your different types of projects. This next type of joint really isn't a joint, it's more of a molding. If you ever shopped around trying to find unique dental molding or specialty molding to add a certain sort of flair to your project, you'll find out that it's pretty expensive. You can use your fast joint system to create all sorts of different types of decorative moldings. Now what you're going to want to do is find the widest piece of stock that you can, preferably 14 inches across. My piece right now that I'm going to be working with is only about 8 inches wide. We're going to be using the male side to make this type of decorative molding. You can also use the female to create the exact opposite look. We set up the bit the exact same way we did in all of our other projects, using the male side as the height so the bit just barely is above that surface. Take the same setup tool, place that in front of the template, slide the stock up forward until it hits that setup block, and lock it in place, and we're ready to start cutting out our dental molding. We use the exact same procedures just like we have in all of our other projects. What we're going to do is start on the outside edge and work across finding each one of the shapes. As you can see, we've got that nice heart shape there. We're going to take a pencil or a pen, and we're going to mark this approximately 3/8 of an inch from that inside edge cut. I'm going to take this over to my table saw, and using my miter gauge, I'm going to cut this piece off to create my piece of trim or molding. As you can see, I've trimmed off my piece of dental molding, and all we need to do now is take some glue and fasten it to the side of our box here to create that nice three-dimensional custom look to our project. Now here's a little tip. Before you actually do your routering to create your dental molding, you can actually round over the outside edge of your project. You can run a bead down there or an OG bit to create a pattern within that dental molding. Truly, you will not be able to find anything that is this unique at your local home center or through custom millworks. It's a great way to add some extra flair to your projects. Not only is your fast joint system capable of making all types of decorative joints, but it's also capable of making half-blind dovetails and through dovetails. We're going to start out by showing you how to do the half-blind dovetails. I've already changed out my standard bushing and replaced it with the 7/16 inch bushing. I've removed the spiral bit and put in the 14-degree dovetail bit. Now before making those changes, always make sure that your router is unplugged. From there, we need to set the height of our bit. Now the height of our bit isn't set based upon the thickness like our decorative joints, it's set to a 3/8 inch height. Included in your package, you receive a 3/8 inch brass bar. Now we use the brass bar because the brass won't damage the carbide. Place the brass bar on top of your template, bring that up to the edge of that router bit, and check it to see if that router bit is at the height of that 3/8 inch bar. If it's not, simply raise or lower the bit. We're all set. Now before we start making any joints with our fast joint system, the dovetail bit is going to cut into the sides of your blocks. What you need to do prior to putting stock in there is remove that with the dovetail bit. Let's show you how. Start on that outside edge and slowly move that in until we clean out all that excess plastic. We'll repeat the same thing on the other side. Now make sure you keep a hold of the jig because the plastic has a tendency to grab that router bit. Nice and slow to make sure that we're not contacting the plastic. Now that we remove the plastic on either side, we're ready to set up to make our cuts. Now, don't worry about that plastic being removed. We still have a reference point on the top edge, and as they wear over time, you can always flip the blocks around on the opposite sides so you get a fresh side, or we do sell replacement blocks available through your local dealers. Now, the pins are cut in the upright position. We need to put our right angle fence onto the jig. The stock has already been prepared. I'm using 1/2 inch walnut for the sides of my drawer box and 3/4 inch poplar for the front and the back side. Now, I like using contrasting woods because it really allows the dovetails to shine or stand out off the drawer box. You can use the same species. You can use the same thickness stock if you want. It's entirely up to you when you're building your project. The only thing you must remember is that you must use at least 1/2 inch thick stock or larger. You cannot go below 1/2 inch because we're going to end up creating a through dovetail versus a half dovetail if we do so. We're going to start out by cutting the pins. We've got our right angle fixture on our jig, and we're going to set this up exactly the same way that we set up for our decorative joints. Take that handy setup block, place it down in front, take your 1/2 inch stock. We're going to place a mark on the side of that stock as a reference. Take that same reference mark, place that up against the edge of your guide block, and slide that right angle fence forward until it touches. And secure the right angle fence down with the toggle clamps. Now that you have that completed, you're going to take your spring clamps, clamp it on, and we're ready to make our cuts. Now remember, if you are cutting a larger or wider or taller stock, the spring clamps may not be heavy enough to hold it to the jig. What you're going to want to do is use a set of C clamps or F clamps on here. We're going to start on the outside edge and slowly work across through each of the fingers, carrying it all the way across our board. Now, as you can see, I'm basically come across the front side and found each of the fingers. Now I'm going to go and cut through each finger. Now what you want to do is you want to take your stock out of the jig and make sure that the router bit is passed all the way through the cut process. You'll notice that the dovetail bit is actually cutting into the MDF base. That's no problem. Over time that base is going to wear out. All you need to do is cut yourself a new piece of 3/4 inch MDF and replace it when it wears too far. Now that we've got one side done, we need to make our cuts on the opposite side. Just like on our other projects, you cannot just flip this over and place it back on the jig. If you do that, your box is going to come out in opposite directions and won't go together properly. What you need to do is take that piece, rotate that over to the opposite side, keeping that same reference mark up against that outside edge. Now we've already set up the fence. You don't need to make any adjustments. Place your C-clamps onto your stock or spring clamps onto your stock and start the cutting process on the opposite side. We're going to work from the outside edge going across the front, taking our time as we make our cuts. After you complete this, you're going to repeat the exact same process on the opposite side of the drawer box. That completes our other side of the drawer box. Now you may get a little bit of fuzz on the edge here. All you need to do is take a little bit of sandpaper and knock that off before you go through your assembly. Now we're ready to cut the front and the back side of our drawer box. We're going to remove our right angle fence, turn the jig around, and we're ready to cut our tails. Now, to get the proper setting for our tails are cut laying down flat on the front and the back side of our drawer box. To get the right distance though, it's based off the side of the box as far as its thickness is concerned. What you're going to do is line the back edge up with that inside edge of the template, scribe a line across the front with a pencil, and that's where we're going to line up our stock when we bring it up to the front side. Now here's a little tip. I found a very easy way to do this. Take the right angle fence and place that on the jig. Slide it backwards until the MDF becomes flush with the inside of the template. Take the side of your drawer box, lay that up against the front of the right angle fence, and place a mark on a couple of those fingers on both sides of the jig. And that's the mark we're going to align to when we're cutting the front and back side of our drawer. Remove the right angle fixture. Place a reference mark on the side of one of the pieces of the stock. Lay that down flat. We need to adjust our toggle clamps up to get the proper thickness. Slide the piece back until it aligns to the pencil mark and secure it in place. Now I'm also going to add my third toggle here to give me some extra holding power. And we're ready to make our cut. Basically what we'll be doing is a plunge cut, starting on one pin, come in to the other, and follow through. And there's our first cut. Now, just like on the sides of the box, you cannot just flip this over and make a cut, because you'll have one side coming this direction and one side coming this direction. What you need to do is take it out of the jig, keeping the same reference mark to the side, and bring it over to the opposite side of your jig. We're going to adjust our toggles for the thickness. Slide that forward until it's even with the pencil line. Lock it down in place. Take our third toggle and we're going to rotate that around. And secure it in place. And make our cuts on the opposite side. After we make this cut, we're going to repeat that on the back side of the drawer. That completes the back side of our drawer box. We're ready for our assembly. Now, I always like to dry fit and test these before I actually put the glue on them to make sure we got a good clean fit. We're going to take all of our stock and stand it so that the X is all facing the same side. Place the side of the drawer box on a nice flat surface. This will eliminate any tear out from the drawer pushing on those pins. Take our one piece, stand it upright on end, give it a little tap, take our other piece, upright on end, a little bit of sanding, add a bottom to our drawer, and there's your half-blind dovetail. You can really see how the walnut stands out and really makes those dovetails proud, or showing off that detail. Now let's go ahead and cut some through dovetails. Cutting our through dovetails is very similar to cutting the half-blind dovetails. The first thing that we need to do is get the correct templates onto our jig. Now, when cutting the through dovetails, you're actually going to use the half-blind tails template to cut the pin side of the joint. You're then going to use the through dovetail template to cut the tail side of the joint. So we need to remove this one template and replace it with our through dovetail tails. This is one of the nice features I like about this jig, is that it doesn't require any wrenches, nor do I have to reset up when I change out my templates. And we're ready to go. Set this to the side. Now we must set up the height of our bit. When we're cutting the pin side of this joint, we're going to use the dovetail bit with a 7/16 inch bushing. We're going to use that brass bar again for setting the height. This bit is set at 3/8 of an inch. The brass bar will not damage the carbide. Simply slide that forward until the brass bar touches the bit. With the router unplugged, we want to check and make sure that we're flush to the top of that brass bar, and we are. We set that to the side. Now I've already prepared our stock. Again, I'm using contrasting woods here to make the joint really stand out. And what you want to do first is place an X on all four edges. Those are the reference marks that always must be up against the side of our joint. Now the pin side of the joint is cut upright, and so is the tails on this particular through dovetail joint. I'm going to be using my walnut for the pin side of the joint. Take your right angle fence, set it on top of your jig, and just like in all the other joints, we use that handy setup block, but there's one difference here. Instead of placing it with the wide side facing the tabletop, we need to flip it upside down and put the wide side facing up. Place your stock with that reference mark up against the edge. Slide these forward until they touch. Secure that MDF fence to the jig with the 2 toggle clamps. And take your spring clamps and secure your stock to the right angle fence. And we're ready to make our cuts. And that's one side of our through dovetails. Now we're ready to cut the opposite side. Just like in all the other joints, you cannot flip the stock over and just cut it because it will end up reversing the joint. What you want to do is rotate your stock over to the opposite side of the jig, same reference spot up against that edge, and make that cut. We're going to complete this process on the other side of our box. And that completes both sides of our cut. Now we're ready to change out that router bit. We want to put in the 3/16 inch upcut spiral bit with the standard bushing. Now that we have our 3/16 upcut spiral bit installed with the standard bushing, we're going to take our jig, rotate it around to the opposite side, remove the right angle fence, turn that around as well, and set it back onto the jig. We do need to set the height of that 3/16 inch spiral bit. We're going to use that brass bar again because we need to set it at 3/8 of an inch. Set the brass bar on top of the template, bring that over with the router unplugged, make sure that we're nice and flush. If we need to adjust a bit, raise or lower it till we're perfectly flush to the top side of that bar. Once you have that completed, set it to the side. Take your front and back side of the stock with the same reference mark, place that up against the outside edge, set it on top, grab that setup bar, and again, we're going to use it with the wide side up, set that up against the template, and we're going to slide that right angle fence forward until we touch the stock and secure it in place. Take your spring clamps and clamp your stock to the right angle fence. And we're ready to start making our cuts. Again, we're going to start on the outside edge and work our way through the joint. Now, if this is the first time that you're using your jig, make sure that you clean out that excess plastic on the underside so that bit doesn't grab a hold of that. And just like before, those fibers may hang up inside the jig. You want to clean them off, clean off your surface, and make your final pass. and that's one side of our box. Now, just like before in all the other joints, you cannot flip this board upright and put it back onto the jig because your box will come out in opposite directions. You need to take that piece and rotate that over to the opposite side of the jig, keeping that same reference spot up against the outside edge. Clamp it onto the right angle fixture and start our cutting. Again, we're going to work from the outside to the inside. And that completes both sides of our box. We're ready for assembly. We're going to stack our stock up so that all those reference marks are facing the same direction. We're going to place our box on a flat surface. Place one in, get it started. Place the second side in, get it started. Take our back piece and set that down into place. And there's our through dovetail box. See how nice the walnut compared to the poplar stands out on both sides. Now, if your joint is a little tight, what you're going to do is take the right angle fence and move it forward slightly. If your joint is a little loose, you're going to take the right angle fence and move it backwards until you get the desired fit that you like. All I need to do to this box now is to add a bottom to it and finish it off. Here's one of the most common problems that you may have with your fast joint system. Because the center point of every single template varies, and of course your stock width is going to vary from project to project, it may be challenging to get your joint to line up center across your stock. Well, we've got a very simple solution for that. Before you get started, it's always a good thing to check your stock to make sure it falls into the pattern correctly. We do this by basically laying it on top of the template and taking a look at the edges to make sure that we line up center. In this case, we are definitely not center. So what we're going to do here is we're going to adjust our stock over until we have the exact same distance on either side of that first shape of the template. Once you have that done, you're going to go ahead and grab a ruler, measure that distance that you have there. We're a little bit over 1/8 of an inch. Cut a scrap piece of stock that is the same thickness of the stock that we plan on cutting. Now all you need to do then is slide that beside your stock, slide that up against the edge of your block, take your setup block, slide that forward till we touch, and secure it in place. Adjust your toggle so we're nice and tight up against the edge, and secure that in place. And we're ready to start making our cuts, and our board is going to come out perfectly centered. Now don't throw that piece away, because you're going to need that same shim when you're cutting the female side of the joint in the upright position. Just place that spacer bar back up against the edge, and you're always going to be on center. You can double check yourself before you start making the cut by flipping your jig upside down and measuring the distance from the edge of that template to the edge of the stock, and checking that same distance on the opposite side. And as you can see here, we are perfectly centered on our jig, ready to make our projects. I hope you've enjoyed this instructional DVD on the fast joint system. Today we covered 11 different style joints that can be made using the templates that come with your system. Keep in mind, 9 of those joints were made using one set of templates. The possibilities are endless. There are 15 other templates available through your local dealers, or that can be purchased online. I'm Dave Hughes, and thank you for purchasing the fast joint system.